Yes.
I'm up, Gloria. You want me to start streaming?
Yeah, because it takes a minute
It's
to
a
come
signal.
on.
It's a fantastic. It takes glorious pictures.
Okay, I'm on it.
If it's not a Nikon, the Nikon, like the silver of this, constantly glowing. It's not yeah.
They're not bad.
No, but this is.
Okay, Gloria, I'm streaming.
Okay, good.
The newer, better digital cameras.
Good morning, good morning. How y'all doing?
Was one of the reasons that you wanted to have more relationship with your seconds? Possibly?
Well, just in terms of.
So the XLRs are for, if you want to bring in some lights to plug in?
We got one if you want.
No, I mean, I don't want these, but I was just curious.
We got wired ones and wireless. We got two wireless and two wired ones.
Yeah.
Two wireless.
Gotcha, so if you're having more like a panel.
I mean, I have it.
Sure.
Unlock it.
Wow, there's like, annotate your, oh, yeah, I mean, your slide.
Yeah. Whatever. Whatever you want to do, just sure. Yes.
Yeah, just put the cap here.
Out to 80 staff. I have a question. Has anyone seen the transmitter, the receiver to the clicker at 510? The receivers are in the rack. Clicker should work on that. Okay, fine.
Oh, is that the position? Oh, awesome. There he is. He's got a marker. Nice. Oh, you did? No, it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I still got that connected. Let's see. Yeah, you're right. I use. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Bless you.
We do, it's, I want to say 247. I'm pretty close, I'm pretty sure it's 247. I used to have, I mean, because, you know, I used to take it from communications and then finally ask them, I'm pretty sure it's 247, I'll check later.
Good morning, good morning.
Speaker house. Let's see, you guys got a third, right?
Nope.
No, just two.
I'll take it.
Come see me later. The, everything's all?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great, great. Yep.
Little League Baseball.
Username is just Captain.
So Captain, thank you, sir.
Lowercase.
Thank you very much.
Lowercase for Callie.
Where did you guys get those hats again?
Elmer came through and gave them out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If you have spoken or will speak, and you have not received a hat, go find Elmer.
Then 170, they just came in. They had, I think he was trying to get them earlier.
And I do believe they are doing t-shirt exchange if they didn't announce that during the housekeeping.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Miguel Bordeaux. I'm the Media Services Manager at Duke Law School.
Hi, I'm Sean Chen. I'm the Digital Resources Librarian at the Duke Law School.
And we're going to be talking about digital access and preservation for video best practices. And what that really means is our best practices.
Our lessons learned and some of the things that we did and are doing and some of the things we didn't do.
So kind of as a background, about 5 years ago, we were still streaming and capturing video and presenting video on our website in real media format. You know, a lot of law schools were doing that. We wanted to kind of transition to something that was a little more palatable, and so we thought, well, maybe we'll go to Flash, maybe QuickTime or MP4 as a delivery format. We had an abundance of files in real media format that we really wanted to either convert or possibly repost in a different format or completely get rid of. We had lots of VHS masters dating back from the late 90s all the way through to the early 2000s. About 5 years ago, we had started collecting all those old VHS masters and converting them to DV cam for cataloging purposes. We also found a couple of years ago some additional boxes that were never cataloged, they were never converted, and they were never posted on our site. So that kind of became the start of this project. Which led the dean of our law school to declare a need for a digital initiatives librarian to create a new position that would become the impetus for the project and also kind of help with the digitization of files within the library and the archiving of that.
So some of the goals of what we wanted to do and to bring in another person to be a librarian was the library is really committed to preserving the scholarship and the intellectual life of our law school. And so we've been maintaining our physical objects for at least 10, 15 years now. And we wanted to be able to deal with it now that we're in this intermediate phase where we're transitioning to purely digital, purely streaming. So we went ahead and we hired a digital initiatives librarian with an eye toward this project, and we're going to actually let her go ahead and speak.
So we actually started the project kind of unintentionally. I was originally tasked with trying to find a way to put video into our repository. But after talking to Miguel and Sean, we realized that we had a variety of video types and that it was a kind of spread out across the library in different places. I mean, there were definitely pockets and closets. There were things saved on different drives. So the first real thing that we had to do was figure out what we had and how it was involved in the workflow. And then after we were able to do that, which actually took a few months for us to just identify what was going on, talk to all the different players about how they related to the project, we came up with a preservation plan. Now, we also had to consult a little bit with other institutions. I know that Miguel had talked or looked at lots of things going on in the broadcasting area. Of course, I looked at documents at the Library of Congress, things that were going on with the Northeastern Document Conservation Center, and consulted quite heavily with Trey McCormick at Buffalo, which has a really large audiovisual collection. So all those perspectives were really brought together, and we're able to sit down and think about, well, what can we do? Duke Law has some really great resources, really great talent, but we are kind of a smaller institution. We're not Library of Congress. We don't necessarily have the budget to do full-scale major digitization. So what could we do with the resources that we had? And the plan we developed was to create a tier system for our different video assets. And that was in consultation with our communications department, media, the library, at many levels, from technical services to administration. And that was refined over time. And that preservation document has actually guided a lot of what we do and a lot of decisions that we make. And we revisit it quite frequently to make sure that it's still a living document. Now, the next thing that we had to do was figure out who's actually going to convert our files. So we had things from DV cams to VHSs to the digital files, but they were in real media and not MP4, which is what we decided we would be using. And so we needed to hire a student, and that's when we hired Allie, actually, to do that and to work on other media projects that we had. And that's worked out really well. It's been a relationship we've had for about a year now. And in that time, we've been able to convert over 200 files and actually create some basic metadata. So instead of buying a very large, expensive package, we've decided to go with our online catalog, which may seem a little non-traditional, yet traditional. We could not afford to buy a big software package, and we did consult with a bunch of companies about how much it would cost, what would it be, but it just wasn't in our best interest. There really is no gold standard for how to preserve your videos, and we basically have had to piece together best practices, and we decided that our catalog needed to manage our assets and that we could actually do a lot of things within there in terms of knowing where the files are actually located, which is a huge important part of the preservation process. We also started to implement checksums, which means that we can monitor the integrity of the video itself. And this actually coincided really nicely with buying a new media server, which we're able to do some dark storage there. We, of course, have always had permissions and rights slips for everything that we recorded, so that wasn't necessarily a problem. And since we have been putting things online, first with iTunes U, which we stopped doing that a while ago, but now with YouTube, we're able to use YouTube as a streaming server while still relying on our dark archive servers for the preservation copying to be able to do the checksums there. So while we have this large, complicated process, I think that it's very similar to ones that we see here at our main library and at other places. There are things being developed with the Hydra collaboration, which Duke is going to be a part of, and we're investigating to see if we can also be in our own Duke local institutional preservation repository. But at this point, there is no real plans to implement that, just a lot of negotiation. I think that we're constantly looking for new solutions because this project will go on forever. Format conversion will go on forever, and that's a realistic expectation that any institution has to have when they start looking at media preservation and things like that.
So this is a large, complicated project, as Holly mentioned. What I'm going to describe here in this overview section is basically some of the major processes that we have identified in our digital asset preservation and access strategy. We have sort of two components that we kind of hinted at earlier. We have our current production workflow, which Miguel and his team are really intricately involved in. This is the recording of events, the production of video, the putting it on the servers. These are all constant things that are going on where we're making close to 150 videos a semester, or a year, sorry.
Much more than that, I think.
My count is about 100, but he says more. But on top of that, we have this huge retrospective conversion of analog and more digital assets that need to be forward migrated. So our first problem kind of is selection, this tier strategy we're talking about. We're picking out what are we going to preserve? What are we even going to film? Our second problem is digitization. How do we move this file or this object into another format which we can then preserve? Describing what the content is and where to put those descriptions in, and building the services to access those descriptions. Ingest. Putting the file into a trusted system, getting it there. Storing this object, getting this object back out. That is a huge issue, especially since we're talking about digital files which range into the multi-gigabyte range. And lastly, distribution. how do we get our content out to our users?
So Holly mentioned our video preservation guide, and what we did was we were able to identify our content and by there come up with 4 preservation tiers. So what that means essentially is how much production value and what is going to be the strategy for the archiving and cataloging of different pieces of content that are produced at the law school. Obviously, high-profile events, annual named lecturers, we have an oral history project that is ongoing, any kind of faculty interviews, and then lots of broadly based communications types of produced materials. All of those would fall under our Tier 1 preservation model. We would have at least 2 local digital copies that we would produce. We'd put one on our archive server, and then we would probably make a couple of physical copies, usually DVD at this point. Our Tier 2 model is very similar. All the conferences that are held at the law school, any sort of a student group organized events that may have a particular speaker, and maybe even some of our B-roll that we use. Again, those would be preserved basically under the same model. And a lot of this actually came from conversations with our communications department. So they had a really big hand in molding this, the preservation tiers, and helping us identify, okay, you know, who are the important speakers that are coming through the law school, and what kind of levels should we place them.
Yeah, to interrupt Miguel here, our communications department is kind of the gatekeeper for our production in some sense. We have both a communications team and an events team which manage access to media's requests. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, they basically act as our producers, or the executive producers in a way. And they are heavily involved in our editing, whether that's our small produced pieces, small documentaries. Our Tier 3 then would be more kind of student-produced materials, where the students are actually maybe manning cameras that we loan out, and then we kind of help them produce pieces that will be displayed on the website, and possibly on our YouTube channel. And then kind of more student social events. We have an international festival every year, which has kind of a talent show. Again, the preservation for an event like that, I don't think is as important, obviously, as when, you know, a Supreme Court justice comes in and gives a lecture, a special lecture.
Well, that totally depends on whose point of view you're at.
Right, that's true. Yeah, right. It depends on who it is, right? And then our Tier 4 model is really kind of our lecture capture, or anything that we decide to record using our Panopto system, or as you like to call it, with garbage, right? So which is, I think, is a cataloging term.
No.
But so that basically would not get preserved at all, and we certainly wouldn't put in our archive.
Yeah, we made the really straight up front decision that classroom recordings weren't going to be treated at all in our selection process. Albeit things might change as we move to massively online classes where we'll be having to produce something for delivery. That would be a sort of different thing.
Of course, current students still do have access to those recordings for 3 years, I believe. That's kind of our little benchmark for that.
Talk about dark storage?
Yeah, dark storage, right. So we also have a number of events over the years, and even found tapes that we either do not have talent releases for, or we did record, but then someone said, hey, can you pull that? We really don't want that shown anywhere broadly. Don't want it on YouTube.
Or people request a specific copy for something that they did, and they just want it for themselves, or they want to hold on to it. And we feel like we need to have a copy because it always comes back around.
Right. In fact, a lot of our oral history projects, we will sit down with a professor for an hour, hour and a half interview, and that raw interview then goes into our dark archive, and then we just splice that up. We have one professor in particular who had some really interesting things to say that the communication staff really wasn't comfortable getting out. So that lives in the dark archive. If someone was doing research on that particular professor, they could check our catalog and have access to that, but it's not something that we broadly put out.
But these objects do still remain under preservation. We do still track the various things, and we still keep them under control.
So Holly mentioned our intern, Allie. She's going to briefly talk about the workflow, and then I'll go a little bit more into it.
Hi, my name is Allie Carlavaro, and my role here is I am basically digitizing and archiving a whole bunch of photographs and videos that we have from the past. And so part of my workflow is I go in and take the video from the VHS tapes that we have and record them onto a DVD, and then rip that DVD. So after the file is converted into an MPEG-4, I copy that file onto the server and enter all of the information of that file into a form, a metadata form, and I put information such as the title, the speaker, the date of the recording, whether or not there were more than one copies, that kind of thing. All of that information is checked over, looked at by Sean, and he then we make copies of the DVDs, label them, and put them in the archive and back, so that way it can be pulled out whenever it's needed, and then we have like a good place that it's all put together, and we can get at it.
Okay, so as you mentioned, the workflow then is to take all this tape catalog that we have, and what we do is we have a control room where we have several VHS tape decks as well as DV-CAM tape decks. We basically record it onto DVDs in real time, and then from there is where we rip for our kind of master digital copy. And the way we do that is by using Handbrake. I'm sure a lot of you have used Handbrake or use it pretty often. Going through a lot of the presets, we decided to choose the Apple TV 3 preset, which if you're recording in HD, gives you kind of that 720p size along with the H.264 base as the encoded MP4. From there, though, I created a Duke Law profile, so one that was kind of more specific with our desired specs. And those specs, you can't probably read it very well, but we basically kept the video settings intact. It was the audio settings that we really changed. We really, honestly, just got rid of the AC3 pass-through. We eliminated that so that we would have kind of an MP4 that wasn't an M4V.
Which is Apple's hack on MP4 in order to get multi-channel audio.
Right. And again, on our preset, we did it at BBR variable bit rate, H.264, and so then it produces a nice sized MP4. And you'll see here, we keep it full frame. So whatever the input was, whether it was standard definition, which we're mostly working in standard definition here, coming from DV-CAM and VHS, we keep that intact.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our tooling and some of the things that we had set up with our computing services and our systems in order to support Miguel's productions and my work. Our storage array is actually pretty big. We actually have 5 terabytes out of 27 terabytes of network disk. We've been moving to network storage rather than RAID storage on the media workstations for a lot of reasons. Some of this is the ability to share content between multiple producers, being able to work at different workstations and access the same Final Cut files was a big, big deal. So moving to network storage was really, really important.
And we've been pushing for that for about 5 to 6 years and finally got that rolling in the last couple of years.
But that also lets us do preservation activities across the network on this on this system. Our networking for at least media is on a 1 gigabit switch that includes both the server that runs preservation activities and the workstations that Miguel uses. This is, I can't emphasize it enough, it was a big change for you guys.
Yeah,
to be able to
absolutely.
move from, instead of having to deal with a FireWire or a USB drive.
Or SneakerNet.
Yeah. Okay. The other big reason to move to network storage in our situation was backups. We had no redundancy, no protection when we put stuff on a drive that's connected to a workstation. Our systems department had worked with our campus. I don't know too much about this system. It's called a Tivoli Enterprise Backup. But I do know it does maintain versioning of files, which was important to me, and where we could get our files off the server, which is in our building, which is important because we have a limited link out. We don't want to be going across buildings. We want to keep everything within. And when we're working with these really large files, we could easily swamp the network if we were going outside the building. But this backup system lets us retain a configurable number of versions of a file, which doesn't happen too much, but it's good to know that we can retain 6 months of backups and be able to go backwards in time and pull a file if we absolutely have to. And the biggest thing is it's outside our building, the backups go off, and they are backed up both onto a combination of disk and tape. For our ingest services, we used a combination of Google Documents. Ali talked about entering in data in a form. We built out just a really thin Google document to kind of capture data as we were ripping files and as we were ingesting. I wrote some Python to access that document and to use it to do other work as we were moving along in this workflow. Our description tools. We actually had a huge amount of MARC cataloging already for our content. The library had been adding VHS. We were cataloging streaming. We have cataloging data for almost a lot of our content from the late 90s until now. It didn't make sense for us to be throwing away all that work in that data. And so we wanted to continue to support that. So in order to do our description, we cataloged this. We did the classic MARC cataloging in WorldCat, bringing it over into our ILS and exposing this data through our Discover systems. So our distribution and access, the Google document, kind of the glue, put everything together. We wrote services that got the data into YouTube, and from YouTube into Drupal. And so now we have our content both discoverable, findable, which was a huge issue for our communications group, and on our website. So as I mentioned, we use Google Documents for everything. It was a big, big time saver. We had a lot of issues. We're trying to use Excel spreadsheets on a network and having people editing them. They'd crash out, there'd be concurrency issues. Google Documents was really good. I programmed against Google Documents API in order to pull rows out of a spreadsheet. We can store our checksums in the spreadsheet. We can store our preservation activities in the spreadsheet. And it has versioning, lets us know who last edited a line. It lets us pull the lines, query them. It's really, really, really nice for just this kind of thin layer of managing data about data. For our preservation activities, we really, because Holly talked earlier about we couldn't afford a real digital asset management system. And there was a really good reason, because Miguel can speak about it, but we really like working on the file system.
Right. I mean, again, it's a matter of what resources do we have, and we certainly weren't willing to spend the money, honestly, to get kind of a high-end digital asset management. Plus, this seems to do exactly what we wanted to do.
We didn't want to change the way we produce video. We didn't want to have to change the way videos were accessed by the production team. It just made sense. Everybody knows how to use a folder.
And it keeps,
Everybody
right,
knows
it keeps
how to
our file
browse.
structure.
We don't have to train people on a specific system. The file system is really nice and simple.
Keeps our file structure intact, really. I mean, that's the important thing.
A lot of the services were really thin, just running checksums, accessing the spreadsheet, putting in cataloging data, the titles, the dates of activity that were done on these files. And that was all very easily done with a general programming language. One really important thing we learned as we were doing this is identifiers are really, really important. And when I mean identifiers, a lot of what I feel like I'm doing when we're managing the data about the things we're preserving, it's managing file names, making sure they're unique, making sure they're understandable by the teams and groups of people who are accessing this data. Identifiers linking our data to the objects. So in our case, we really use our bibliographic record numbers and our OCLC numbers to link to data about what's in the content of these particular things. And of course, the identifiers that we have when we distribute things. So when we push into YouTube, there is an identifier, a unique identifier that YouTube issues, which gets you the URL to access the video. So where did we have data about our videos? We had to get it from a lot of different places. The first place was catalog records. We had cataloging for all of this stuff that I explained earlier. We had calendaring and event descriptions, which Miguel, you might want to explain what it is.
So this is really interesting because when student groups or clinic groups or journals decide to hold an event or a conference, it's up to them to provide a calendar description for the particular event. And what happens, though, is then you get all kinds of tagging and titles from all across the board. You know, Tom Metzloff may be called Thomas Metzloff in one and Tom in the other. And so we really had to work with our communication staff to kind of be able to kind of have some editing over that. And we still continue to do that. I mean, I think that's the one problem in terms of being able to tag videos and keep it consistent across the board.
Right. The actual object from the tape. The tape says a lot. We have had 3-4 media services managers in the years that we have actually been filming events at our law school. And the tapes often have scribblings or information or a little sheet of paper that says what this thing was.
Or just the date.
Or just the date, yeah, well then you have to watch it. Our website had data about these videos. We had lots of handcrafted HTML for conferences, talking about who appeared in conferences. We've used the Wayback Machine to pull information off our website that corresponded to particular years in prehistory. There was lots of sleuthing that has to go on in order to really do the work in accurately describing who or what was in the contents of these videos. And our releases, we have talent releases. We make people sign them. I think we signed them, or at least we agreed to.
Yeah, I don't think I ever signed them.
Okay.
Not for this.
But we have releases, and the releases are usually event-specific. So we can get dates. We can find out who appeared in a video because we don't recognize every law professor in the country who comes. We could do
Well, and we also, when they signed the release, we asked that they also fill in the title of the event that they're.
One question about
Yes.
those releases. Do you ever give them the ability to say, well, you can use it for this, but not for that, and
Sure.
revise the...
Yes, and that kind of goes back into why we dark archive certain things.
Right.
Like we have something where the library can keep a copy on site for people to view.
Or they're okay with live streaming it that day, but then.
And from our purposes, having a DVD on reserve is not a strategy for preservation. So having a digital file in a trusted system, that is the only way we're going to ensure that we're going to be able to have that content available, because the reserves walk away. For description, I'm going to talk a little bit about why we picked to do things through cataloging, through traditional library cataloging. We're transitioning to the new cataloging code, Resource Description and Access, which lets us describe video content a little bit better. The rules, there's details in it, but it lets us name things. One really important thing with the new cataloging code that I like is the focus on user tasks for why we are describing the content the way we are. And these include the ability to find these videos, which is obvious. Find them in both traditional catalog systems, but also find them on the web. Identify them, know what this is, accurately match this thing to another thing. Select if it's actually the thing that they want, and obtain it to actually access it. And our catalog systems do a pretty decent job of that. Another good reason was because we did a lot of authority control on the people who appear in our videos. So we actually identify and create national authority records for everybody who is substantively talking in our videos. So if a entry-level professor from a New York law school comes and speaks at our school, I go ahead and create an authority record for them so that we can control their names, so that we can identify them and find this person in our discovery systems. But also, in future cataloging, if they write a book, we'll be able to link our video to that book that they're writing. We use WorldCat mostly because we wanted to do authority control. We also assign subject headings to most of our videos in order to identify the content better. And we pulled our stuff into our integrated library system through WorldCat and Connection, which lets us get this into our classic discovery systems. One other thing to speak about with the ILS is we're still having to manage physical contents. We don't want to throw away our source masters. So these VHS tapes, even though they're degrading, and that was part of the impetus for this, because we were looking at a 10 to 15 year horizon before we could stop being able to read these things, we still want to keep that tape. We don't want to throw it out. So having inventory control and on top of it, bibliographic control on these things was really, really, really important to us. And the integrated library system actually offered tools that we feel were actually something we knew about and that we could use, and at the same time access them and use the information from it in other places like these access systems we're going to talk about.
You want to talk about catalog?
I don't.
Okay. Right. So initially we had a streaming server, Real Media Server. We moved away from that several years ago, and we were streaming live events in Flash on a university server. But we really wanted to kind of get out of the streaming server business in terms of when people visit our website for video. We had been using iTunes U for a while, but honestly it became more of a pain in the ass than anything in order to upload to two different sources, or three different sources at that point. And we felt we were getting more bang for the buck, or, well, there's no buck really, on YouTube. So we have our own YouTube channel, which I guess I'll talk about a little bit more in detail, but for us, that became kind of the delivery point for our videos.
And that being the delivery point kind of lets us pull the data from YouTube, because it has such great accessibility, into lots of other systems, like our content management system, and to our various campus partners who want to reconsume our data and reconsume our content and put it on their systems. So Miguel's going to talk a little bit about YouTube.
Yeah. Okay, so actually spoke to Carl about our YouTube channel yesterday. How many folks are using kind of YouTube channels as a way to provide content? Yes, a lot. So do you all have kind of that special agreement that you can have longer than 15-minute videos or whatever it may be? Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really important. It was really important for us to be able to provide that long-form content. For us, it's so you all know that it's great to create playlists. Obviously, the design goes in line with the design of our website, and in terms of our production workflow. Now, we haven't gone to the YouTube streaming yet, but in terms of our production workflow, it's a very quick. Take what we just recorded, or take one of our produced pieces. Quickly export it out and then just put it online. It's super easy. We have then a process where our communications staff and Sean check the titles and the descriptions so that we can again get it all accurate across the board, and more so for Sean's cataloging purposes.
So Miguel's describing kind of the manual uploading process during our regular production workflow. So Miguel's team cuts a 3-minute promotional video, uploads it to YouTube, it gets approved by communication staff, and it goes out to the world.
Right, and so and at this point, and the last several years, we've been shooting in digital. We no longer have been using tape. In fact, even in our control room setting, in terms of recording events, the only kind of hard disc that we're producing is a DVD. We're no longer really using DVD cam.
For this massive amount of, and we're looking at over 1,000 videos, we are converting them to digital files that are not in YouTube. So we have to use the Google Data API in order to upload them. And our experience with it is pretty good because we actually have data in our ILS or in our spreadsheets about these videos. So we can easily create descriptions, upload them to YouTube, and boom, we can load 25 videos into YouTube in a couple hours. We did find some issues with the API and actually YouTube in general. One of the big issues is titles are limited to 150 characters. That's a little bit hard. It's an issue with identification, but you actually want also longer titles for a lot of our communications purposes to identify who's in it or what part of a conference this is in. And it's actually, these things get really lengthy and it's actually kind of a problem to have that limit. Descriptions are around 5,000 characters, which isn't so much an issue. But one area that we've had a lot of kind of problems and we're still kind of grappling with is the limitations on keywords being 30 characters, and because we have to walk a lot of longer descriptions. So we have entities like our Center for International and Comparative Law, that's more than 30 characters. Well, we have to put in a tag there for that center in order to do something with this data, in order to associate it with the center. And so we have to walk a lot of things. And so we haven't quite got to the point of being really able to use it because of that limitation.
Okay, so this is kind of our new presentation for video on our website. Several years ago, we basically just had this long running text list of here's what we have dating back to 1998 to the present. It was lengthy. It was difficult to maneuver through, and it was also a little bit difficult to search. Searching capabilities here are easy. We have some great thumbnails for each video. You can play it either within the website, you can go straight to the YouTube channel. We just found that it was a little bit easier once we got kind of into this YouTube flow of things to then be able to incorporate that video on the website.
So we have a really small little PHP application that goes and pulls YouTube and pulls the feed for newly added videos from our channel and pulls the data from YouTube and then uses the Drupal feeds module to import and create a content node for that video with its embed code automatically, and it all just runs perfectly fine. The one hang-up we kind of had is that Google's data APIs don't really let you sort by an update date. You kind of have to manufacture, you have to fake that. So if we went backwards on our descriptions and fixed something that was from 3 years ago, we either have to pull the whole list, which can get pretty lengthy if you start getting into the 1,000 item or 1,000 video length, or you just have to be more clever, I guess. One important thing that our communications department really wanted us to push that kind of pushed us over the hump with YouTube was findability, was this need to be able to find these videos on the open web, that YouTube does this really good job of indexing and locating this content. Us bringing it in onto our website rather than just doing a simple widget and kind of embedding it in our content wasn't going to quite help further that findability. Actually having our content on our website pointing to the video was more effective, and I think as we get into, we haven't quite figured out the analytics of help, but it can't hurt.
And again, it goes back to, we have all these old videos in real media format that
Right.
the only way to access those was still to go back and who has a real media player.
Yeah, so migration was a big issue there, and to make our old retrospective content accessible and findable. And I wouldn't be a librarian if I couldn't show a catalog. And we have catalog entries for all of our video that we have streaming, and we have a physical object for. One important thing that I mentioned, because we do authority control, is that we can find the people who are in these very easily, and we can co-locate them and get to them. It's the beauty of bibliographic control. The other really important thing, and Holly alluded to it, was our ILS is a trusted system. We know the data isn't just going to go away. It can't just be written out. There's procedures in place for it. Also, at least with authority information, we have services that run on there, so if someone's name changes, we can fix those entries in our catalog fairly easily. Whether we can get that back into YouTube, that's a whole other separate problem. We'd like to talk a little bit about streaming, just because we're doing it at a CaliCon and we're being live streamed.
So we are being live streamed, and we've been looking to try the YouTube streaming at some point, but we actually have a Ustream Pro as kind of our current model for streaming. For us, it's kind of an easy, well, the university actually is what really drove us to do it. Duke had a special kind of agreement with Ustream. We were able to create our own sub-channel, and we can basically stream whenever we like. And it does produce a file at the end, but what we do is we take whatever, we are either recording onto a digital media recorder or onto DVD and then ripping that file. And then that way we can actually go back and if we need to do some post-production work, we do. And then we can post at our leisure as opposed to doing it from Ustream. I don't think people are going to Ustream to watch recorded video. So metrics. So there are certainly metrics on Ustream for when you're streaming events. live, but also within our YouTube channel. This is really more for communications folks. They want to see what we're producing, and if people are watching, certain conferences, if certain conferences or special lecturers or certain people are getting hits, then they certainly would remain within that first tier of preservation model. If not, we may decide maybe we'll bump them down to the tier 2 or tier 3 preservation model if it doesn't seem like, people are ingesting it.
One other thing is, because we wanted to pull this into our website, we haven't been running it long enough, but hopefully we have our Google Analytics to be able to show us who's coming to visit these sorts of videos and what they're being used for. There's interesting metrics for all of this, but we really haven't had much time to really explore the implications of them, or even to really ask the kind of question that would let us reach some sort of decision about something. As we were mentioned, we did choose not to do certain things, and there's some big things we didn't do. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The big one was we didn't do lossless, and that was mostly a resource issue. We did not have the equipment or software to be able to do 10-bit lossless JPEGs as the Library of Congress does. Now it might be more feasible. Our campus is actually starting to convert its analog video in lossless format using Blackmagic cards and multiple workstations. The other issue, storage, was sort of a reason, but also is kind of the transport of it too that was going to be not timely enough, and that's sort of something that kind of pushed us down there. But also, we really feel like the MP4 was good enough quality, and as we were looking forward to event, Miguel will talk about it more, is a full digital production workflow where everything is born digital and ends digital. With MP4 being our final destination format, we wanted to reduce the number of formats we were supporting. From the metadata side, we looked into PBCore a lot. And I actually really like PBCore because it really handles instantiations really well. It models that really nicely. Whether you can write systems against it, that's a whole other thing, but for the metadata geek in you, it's really good. One other thing that PBCore has is a number of crosswalks. There's some pre-generated XSLs which can move the data from PBCore into other systems like mods. Miguel mentioned we didn't do a full-up digital asset management system that WGBH in Boston would purchase for their production workflow. We're not at that scale. We feel like we're a pretty big production shop, but it just couldn't, we didn't reach that tipping point in being able to have the sort of system which would let you, I don't know, you can describe these things too.
Well, again, it comes down to resources, which we just don't have.
And as we mentioned, we just didn't go down the classroom recording retention strategy. It was a barrel we did not want to open. And at the time, we were looking at some sort of managed repository system for managing our files. But we didn't take that route because we were really trusted the file system a lot. We really feel comfortable just dragging and dropping into a folder. We're okay with it. So where do we want to go?
High definition, right? So a majority of our classrooms already have high definition capability. Our control room, the same. We have some high definition switchers. So we can do event recording in high definition. We still have 4 classrooms which are in standard. However, when we do our own production, we do shoot in 720p. So this, of course, will affect our workflow. We'll be recording 720p events onto our digital media recorder, and so we'll just kind of eliminate that step of having to take a physical copy on a DVD and rip it. We'll just take that file again. If we need to do any editing, we can throw it into the editor But that's basically what we're going to. Right, so here's the all digital production workflow. So it will just be quicker, easier. We ingest it, we download it to our local drives, and then we upload it and place it in the appropriate archive, whether it's our current archive or our live archive or our dark archive.
I mentioned that we didn't actually go with a managed digital repository system. Our campus is actually looking at extending its use of Fedora. They've actually had a testbed Hydra Fedora instance, which they're using for their image production, for their image digitization for books and manuscripts. And we were looking into whether we could actually use that instance, and we would probably have to work on some sort of ingest application into Fedora and developing the services to pull out of it. But it's definitely something that would offer protection, but also kind of make it less hand-holding that we do right now. I mentioned we've had a little trouble with YouTube tags, but we have this really rich data about subject headings, about people who appear, for classification about our videos in our catalog. We really need to look at the way we organize content on our Drupal website, the taxonomy of objects, what something is, in order to be able to reuse it. That's something we really want to do, and we have the data there to do it. It's just a matter of really analyzing it. So hopefully we'll eventually get a really talented intern who can do this. Thanks, guys. And we're really
I do want to make a quick comment. If anyone is interested in taking a look at our video preservation guide and the different tiers, I'll be happy to email it to you. Anybody have a question? All right. Awesome. Thank you. It's really, we provide access to the classroom recording for about 3 years. Right, exactly. For as long as the students are there. Now, right. I mean,
No, I didn't.
but so if somebody really needs.
No, it's too many heads to be just represented.
Okay.
You got like 2 big boxes just full.
Then that DVD
Ahead.
is
I'll have to go check it out.
We really don't.
170?
Right down the steps. If you go to the steps,
Yeah.
then you gotta walk around and go straight.
Okay, probably where I registered.
Actually, it's in the same alley direction, but you gotta go through these 2 doors. Yes, sir.
Okay, what did you guys have to do to get that YouTube channel?
Actually, they did this Cali.
Yeah.